I really like the 12 Hours videos. There was there's a sketch in The Simpsons called Steamed Hams, and someone has done a 12-hour version of it, and someone had done a Twin Peaks version of it as well. Absolutely brilliant. But
Steamed hams.
But there's a very dangerous world out there in terms of time. Start thinking about one sketch from one show, then you go and look at what people have done with it. You're like, wow.
But you get to a kind of zen-like state after 12 hours of that. I mean, you must be seeing new depths in it by that point.
Yeah, absolutely.
Even if you're kind of hallucinating them.
Yeah.
That is astonishing.
But now I see steamed hams is everywhere now. I know it.
I'm not going to turn around and look out the window because I'm too scared about what I might see.
I know it's not. I know I just think about it more. But essentially, every single time like I open Twitter or Reddit or something like that, there's some cultural reference to steamed hams. And I'm like, wow.
No, you definitely have an observer bias.
Yeah, definitely.
I have lived my life in ignorance of the Simpsons and steamed hams, except insofar as you've talked to me about them.
Yeah. But now you won't be able to avoid it.
No. I'm exercising my very strong powers of forgetting now.
Steamed ham.
Nah! You ruined it. Hello, Ash.
Hello, Ian. How are you?
I'm very well. We're back.
Back again.
Yeah. Episode 3.
After a wildly successful launch.
Wildly successful.
Yeah.
I think we've had like 30 listens.
That's great.
Yeah. And nobody's coming for us.
No major copyright infringements.
And I look outside and there are no people with torches or pitchforks. So we're doing all right.
Or we're not doing well enough.
Yeah. Good point. Very good point.
We had a question, though.
We did have a question. And the question was tweeted to our hilariously named Twitter account.
Oh, yeah. That one.
At What a Lot of Thing.
Thing. Singular.
Yeah. Because, limits. The question was from our friend Lee Rathbone.
Ah, of course.
Lee wanted to know, are we going to have guests?
And what did you say?
I said, yes, but probably not for a while. And that answer had a subtext. And the subtext was, we don't want any guests to find out how crap we are at doing this. And we don't want to make any guests have to do re-recording because I set the levels wrong on the little thing.
That's never happened.
That's never happened apart from 2/3 of the time. So we might well have guests, but only when we're good at it. So ask us in, 8 episodes time or something.
Yeah.
So we've done hello.
Done.
I think we've done the question.
We've done D'Artagnan and the Three Musketeers. We've done the question. We've done the perils of colonial treasure. So there's plenty to edit out there.
Edit that out as well.
Yeah.
Right, okay. So what are we going to do now? Yeah, okay, so let's introduce the idea that we may talk about things.
Okay. So I can do that.
Okay.
So we've got 2 things to talk about today, and I believe I'm going to go first.
You are.
Right.
What's your thing?
So my thing this time is the 4-day work week
Ooh.
in Japan at Microsoft.
Ah, that's narrowed it down a bit. I was hoping for a 4-day work week myself.
Global 4-day work week. Yeah. Maybe not there yet. So the reason it piqued my interest quite a lot was that it was in Japan, and I have deep impressions of Japanese working culture. That is, they work a lot. They work many, many hours and sleep at their desks and all kinds of things. I realise this is probably fed by lots of weird Western cultural misrepresentations of Japanese culture.
Yeah, I'm sure that's right.
But that's why I noticed it, and that's why it seemed like a really good thing to talk about.
Yeah.
So I think it was a 5-week trial of a 4-day work week, and it resulted in just about 40% increased productivity.
Whoa.
Which is quite a lot.
Yeah. Well, that's, I guess, 80% of the time and almost half as much output again.
Yeah. Yeah.
However you measure output, which is an interesting
side question. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't really go into how they measured that. And they thought that a lot of it was thanks in short to shorter, more efficient meetings as well.
I guess people have the feeling that they've got less time, so they don't hang around so much.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or drone on for hours.
Yeah, absolutely. And then also, the article that I saw this in is a bit vague about this, but it says reduced like the time off that people took as well. It doesn't specify whether that was holidays or sickness, but it just said that there was like 25% less time off taken in that 5-week period. So I don't know how much to read into that.
That's interesting, though.
Mm.
It kind of makes me wonder. It's one of those things where, okay, it's a 5-week experiment. It's not academic studies with controls and all that kind of thing. But it makes me think, if I was a CEO of something and I thought someone showed me a way to get 25% more productivity, then I'd kind of leap at it.
Yeah.
And you kind of wonder, why isn't everyone trying this?
Yeah. I think there's a lot of deep-seated cultural thinking and bias around, how much time you spend doing something versus how much output or how effective you are at doing something. So I know what you mean, but I think probably a few CEOs who might turn around and say, well, I value seeing people at their desks from 9 to 5, Monday to Friday.
Yeah, because that's the important thing.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think from experience, I've identified a few places I've worked, a few people who've been very much of that mindset, who've celebrated how many hours people have done.
Yeah, and you kind of get people walking around boasting about how they haven't had any lunch today because they were just been so busy that they had to work through their lunch.
Yeah, but the whole reading about this and digging more into it reminded me of a book that I read not too long ago called Utopia for Realists by Rutger Bregman, about how in the last 150 years or so, all the economists have been saying things like, well, we're going to need to find a way to use all the spare time that we're going to have through automation. Yeah, absolutely. But it hasn't worked out like that because we've actually turned out that we want more things rather than more time, which is kind of strange, isn't it? But, you kind of see it around you all the time.
Well, I think that's actually been on purpose. And this whole thing of continuing economic growth has been centered around the idea that having more things will make you happy.
Yeah.
So actually, I think that it's probably true to say people want more things, but I'm not sure it's true to say that, it definitely isn't true to say that having more things makes you happier. So, yeah, I mean, I'm speaking as someone whose house is full of things.
Doing a podcast about things.
Yes, what a lot of them there are, we might say.
And I think the other idea in that book as well, which is kind of more to the point of this, is that a lot of work is actively seen as like purposeless, as fairly useless. And a lot of us acknowledge it as well.
Bullshit jobs.
Bullshit jobs is the phrase, and it's just like, well, so a lot of us acknowledge that at least some of our jobs and our role, if not all of it, are superfluous to a genuine purpose, whatever you determine that for yourself to be.
Yeah.
So it shouldn't be too much of a surprise that when someone, if you cut down the working week and suddenly you're a bit more productive and a bit happier, because you probably naturally start to select the parts of your role and the work that's done in your organisation that make the most difference. Do you think that happens?
I'd like to think that, but I mean, this whole thing of bullshit jobs, I'm going to have to bleep all these out now, aren't I? We've said we're not, we've said we're a non-explicit podcast, but this whole thing about bullshit jobs, give myself some more work now, is something that's gathering momentum because it's actually seen to be better to be doing something pointless.
Yeah.
Than to be doing something that's maybe not economically productive but has a purpose. And it's probably a bit of a flaw in the way society thinks, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, if you translate it to like the world of software development.
Oh, steady on.
If your team built a thing that made millions upon millions of pounds and it took a limited amount of time to build and it meant that you hit all your targets for that particular year or whatever, shouldn't you just say, well, fine, we're done for a bit?
Yeah, let's do something to make the world a better place.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, in terms of finding out what is the right thing to build, really looking and experimenting and studying to see what is the right thing to build at that time, rather than just building enough stuff and seeing what sticks, even if you don't really know what sticks. Because I think this always reminds me of, over the course of like your career when you build stuff, only really 10 or 20% of that will ever be used on a regular basis. Most of the stuff that I've ever built has probably never been used on a regular basis, or never at all. So the real trick is finding that 10 or 20%. So imagine if you could do a shorter working week, working on that 10 or 20% of stuff that makes the biggest difference. That sounds like purposeful work to me.
Yeah, it absolutely does. And I think what's interesting is you hear a lot more the term social enterprise now.
Yeah.
I attended an event put on by the RSA, which is the Royal Society for the Promotion of Arts and Manufacturers and Commerce. which is
That's not what RSA
that's why we
stands for.
call them the RSA, because their full title takes about half an hour. But I went to an event in Bradford a few weeks ago, which was held at a co-working space that's targeted at social enterprise, and there was a lot of people doing things that might or might not make them reasonable amounts of money, but actually the main purpose is to make the world a better place.
Yeah.
And I think that as a driver, that's really, really increasing in popularity, and maybe that will be a great thing, to get rid of or to reduce the number of so-called bullshit jobs.
Yeah. So I drive it like the other way around. Say, let's make sure that we build something meaningful and build what people will actually want. And then you spend less time doing that work because you're actually selecting the right things to build. So I think there's probably needs to be a bit of both. There needs to be a bit of a transformation in the way that we think about like the working week, for example, and how long it is and what hours mean and what effectiveness means. And then also looking at how we build software as well, as in stop coming up with giant lists of requirements,
Yeah.
most of which are not requirements. They're just people shoehorning things into documents to try and get them built, and then experiment to pick the right things to build, which take up less time but are more impactful. That sounds like pretty purposeful work to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Completely agreed. And adding this concept of stakeholder value on top of shareholder value.
Yeah.
So the things that you're building, the significant things that you're building, aren't just targeted towards making more money, but actually toward value for all of the people involved in the process and in the outcomes of the thing you're building.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think on that note, one of the key questions here with a shorter working week or a differently structured working week or whatever, however we want to describe it, is will it be equally distributed for all? We can talk about the software development context, where a lot of the time you can work remotely, you can work from wherever you are, you can work whatever time you like. But there are other industries too. How would you spread the benefits to service and retail in places like that?
Yeah, and actually it's a really good question. I mean, even in software development, if you're running a service, it'd be very hard to force incidents to only happen on Monday to Thursday or whatever days of the 4-day week sits. And productivity in that context is about how quickly you restore service or fix whatever the problem is.
Yeah.
And actually, you probably don't get a 40% uplift in that.
No.
And actually what you get is, to have the same coverage, you probably need to hire more people.
Yeah.
So I guess the benefits are uneven. And when you're talking about service industries as well, retail is a great example, isn't it? Are we going to train ourselves to go shopping only on 4 days a week? I guess they'd be a different 4 days, would they? But in terms of high street retailers who are, maybe small shops, that would increase the amount by which Amazon is more convenient than going out, because you could just order something online. Whereas if you're looking around for, well, you're not open today, that's why a Sunday opening came from, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So it could absolutely have side effects, and if it does get adopted wider, it will have side effects that we sort of can't fathom at the moment.
Yeah.
So it can fundamentally change society as well. I think one of the things, just popped into my head was about, rather than thinking about full-time jobs, we even measure the phrase full-time equivalent.
Yes.
Often we even measure things by describing roles in that way.
Yeah.
In tech, I've very rarely come across jobs which are available for job share, for example.
Yeah.
It's so rare. It's incredibly rare in technology. And even flexible times and hours, etc. I think it's still very, very, the provision for that is still pretty basic.
And it's very hard to sort of manage unless you're a large organisation, where if you've got 50,000 people in your organisation, it's easier to smooth things across that number of people than it is if you've got 3 or 5 or even 10.
Yeah. But I think it's really beneficial, because imagine if you've got a role for, say, I don't know, a quite influential role for like a principal engineer or a principal tester or whatever it is, and you can get 2 really great candidates to share that role and bring all that benefit to you, or all that experience and skill to your organisation, but you're just not set up to do that. Yeah. I'm not saying it'll work perfectly every time, but imagine the power of that.
Yeah, there'd be a thing about alignment and being able to agree on one technical vision or whatever it might be. But you're absolutely right that if you could make that work, if there was that alignment, then you've got double the experience pulling towards it. For those kind of roles, that can be incredibly powerful.
Yeah, absolutely.
That could be absolutely amazing.
Yeah, but we just don't seem to be. It doesn't seem to be considered.
No.
Because I think, as a person who's been in that sort of role before, but also has other interests outside of that organisation, a job share would have been absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
It really would have been. So it would have given me personally time to do other things that I'm interested in, plus also help that organisation and influence their strategy.
And that kind of, I guess, leads to freelancing, because that's the way that you can get some kind of control and flexibility.
Yeah.
Without being employed. If employers could do it.
Yeah. So you go completely freelance because you don't want to be within the constraints that exist within organisations, but isn't there another way of doing it?
Yeah, absolutely.
So shorter working weeks and different ways of thinking about how work is done, I think would be really powerful.
Come on, organisations.
Yeah, time for you to step up.
Yep.
Give us what we want.
Yeah. When do we want it? What do we want? Cool. Okay, so I have a thing too.
Ian, tell me about your thing.
I actually meant I have a thing also, but it would be true to say it's a thing too as well.
It is a thing too, and a thing also.
Yeah. So my thing is actually about design thinking, which is something I became fascinated by and learned a lot about when I was at IBM, because they adopted it in a very big way. It's a tool set that lets you, that is stolen basically from designers. Stanford, D School and IDEO, the sort of design consultancy. Maybe I should call them the creative consultancy, but they kind of codified what design thinking was.
Right.
I suppose I should go on Wikipedia and find out that it was probably somebody else that invented it, but they certainly popularized it.
Yeah.
And the great thing about it is that it's from design and it's used extensively by designers, but actually you don't have to be a designer.
No.
And I think that it's really beneficial for actually many people to have some kind of understanding of it, and technical people as well.
Yeah.
There's a great quote about design from Steve Jobs, and I realised that by mentioning his name, I've alienated like 85% of the audience. I don't care. I'm going to look at my Apple screen and read the quote from it.
We are surrounded by Apple's back catalogue here, so...
Yeah, sadly back catalogue rather than current catalogue, but yeah, can't have everything. The quote is that most people make the mistake of thinking design is what it looks like. People think it's this veneer that the designers are handed a box and told, make it look good. That's not what we think design is. It's not just what it looks and feels like. Design is how it works. And technical people from all sort of disciplines within that, we're all about how things work.
Yeah.
And so it kind of makes some sense that design thinking will be something that technical people will be able to use and embrace.
Yeah, absolutely. I think often I've seen that divide in the workplace as well, where designers have been squirreled off into a corner and we've built a thing which may or may not meet a need, and then the designers have been asked to make it good.
Yes.
And I think I've heard myself saying that sometimes as well. So rather than seeing it as like a unified process, if you like.
Yeah, it's designers and testers stuffed in at the end.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that particular process too.
I think design thinking certainly is something that is very much an upfront thing, but it doesn't have to be just about product design, and you can apply it not just to external end customers, but to internal things and processes and stuff as well. I always think if management comes along and says, right, we're not doing any test automation, we should do test automation, then actually you can use design thinking to dig into actually what should that look like in this organization.
Yeah.
Who is it that we're doing it for? Whose life is made easier by it? And how can we make sure that their lives are made easier and that you actually get the benefit?
Yeah. I've actually had discussions, I was about to say arguments, but discussions, well, both actually, about things like that before, where people have talked to me about test automation and wanting tons and tons of user interface-based test automation. And I've said, well, what problem does it solve? Who is currently hurting? Who is currently being hurt or, value being eroded by us not having tons and tons of this sort of test automation?
Yeah, exactly.
And it's been like, no one's been able to answer that question for me. Like, well, point me at live service impacting issues which would be helped by having these tests. And they're like, well, there haven't been any. I'm like, right, okay. So where do we go with this?
Yeah.
But that felt like a similar interaction. I was trying to get to who's this for and what problem does it solve?
Yeah, exactly so.
So, right, but I didn't use the design thinking toolkit as such. It was more like just questions
Yeah.
about, like say, who's it for and what is the purpose of it.
So those are actually, design thinking definitely does ask those questions. There's another quote that I like, which is from a luminary.
Ooh.
Like that word. That word deserves more airplay. A luminary of the design world called Don Norman. And he described design thinking, and he said, designers don't try to search for a solution until they've determined the real problem. And even then, instead of solving that problem, they stop to consider a wide range of potential solutions. That's really good, because often, from a technical perspective, we already have a solution in our minds and we focus on that. But they stop to consider a wide range of potential solutions, and only then will they finally converge upon their proposal. And he says this process is called design thinking. But it's got this whole concept of divergent and convergent thinking. So you start off by thinking very broadly and thinking of as many ideas as you can, or thinking as widely as possible, and then convergent thinking to zero in on what the solution is.
Yeah, I like that, the thought of not sort of solutionizing too early. I remember using a technique once where I was getting a team to come up with ideas about a particular problem, and we came up with like 20 ideas, and even though they were like, some of them were like ridiculous, but we kind of stretched. So we did about 10, and then the next 5 were just silly. But then we actually got to the next 5 were actually really good ideas after that, because we'd gone like beyond the obvious into the ridiculous, and then started to sort of coalesce around a few ideas that were actually really good.
That's great. And actually, when I'm facilitating design thinking sessions, I quite often say to people, you must come up with a silly idea. At least one silly idea. Because when you start seeing silly ideas from other people, they can spark, well, actually, that is silly, but... And then you can see some grain of real value in there, and then add it to something else that was already in your head and come up with something great. And it sounds like that's what happened in your example.
Yeah, definitely.
So that whole idea of divergent thinking is really, really great when it comes to having ideas and just trying to scan the horizon of ideas from miles around, rather than, being too focused on whatever might be in front of you.
Yeah.
But actually, before that is interesting as well, because that thing which he describes as determining the real problem, design thinking really puts a lot of focus on empathy.
Yeah.
And so when you're solving someone's problem, there's a whole set of things you can do to really empathize with, or gain a shared understanding of what that person's world is actually like. And you create something called an empathy map, which sort of focuses around the observable things. So what do they say and what do they do? But also non-observable things. So what do they think? And importantly, how do they feel? And then you sort of getting into a scenario of how do they achieve this thing today?
Yeah.
Then you're looking at, in each of the steps of that, how do they feel and what are they doing? And you end up with something that lets you really identify where the pain points are. And I think that really then informs the ideas that you're having, because you've got a shared understanding of these are the pain points and this is what we have to solve.
Yeah. And then often when you're trying to transform something in an organization or introduce new ideas, there's going to be resistance. So you need to have that empathy too, and find out how different people feel about what the proposed change or the proposed new approach. I think it gives stakeholders a chance to actually express those feelings rather than internalizing them and then sabotaging your efforts later on.
Definitely.
And I think that's something that I could have used. Probably, I can think of a few times in my career where it would have been a really good idea to do that.
Yeah, it's interesting because I guess it's a bit of a journey.
Yeah.
And what you can't do is get to the end of the journey and then go and tell all these people, this is it. This is what we're doing now. You have to make sure that people come along on the journey with you, and you have to do frequent playbacks of all the different stages, and you have to do it to all those people so that they can have the chance to say, hang on a minute, you may think that helps me, but actually it creates all these other problems.
Yeah.
So that you involve them and they come along on the journey.
Yeah.
So that at the end, they're not surprised by the result. And in fact, they're bought into it because they contributed to it. And that's why it's really important, particularly if you're doing something, that maybe the test automation example, if you just focus on what the highest paid person's opinion, Hippo, if you just focus on that, they might have a problem that they identify, like this costs too much or something like that. But if you haven't got the people on the ground who are using the thing or trying to do this, whatever it is, then you're going to produce something that doesn't solve their problem.
Yeah.
Whether that's involving software developers and testers, or someone up there might say we need to do test automation. But if you involve all of the stakeholders, all of the people who will benefit and use that,
Yeah.
then you're going to get a much better solution. And that seems like a no-brainer.
Yeah.
And maybe all you're doing is dressing it up and saying, oh, this is design thinking and therefore it's magic and you should...
But it's the
magic
tools
things
and
again.
techniques that you can use in order to facilitate those sessions, like an empathy map, for example. Yeah. That's the sort of the difference, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And if you try and find the design thinking process by Googling, the Stanford D School executive education slide that comes up when you do a picture search.
Yeah.
It's got the stages of empathize, define, ideate. That's a word that should have less airplay. Prototype, test, and assess. See, that's a really great kind of set of steps, and prototyping and then looking and seeing where you are. But what that doesn't reflect really is the iterative nature of things. And what I really like IBM's, and I used to work there, so I suppose I should declare an interest, and this was how I originally learned it. But they have an infinite loop model, an iterative model for design thinking that is basically broken down into observe, reflect, and make. It's suggesting that those things are a loop and are iterative, and I think that's really, really important.
Yeah.
And actually how it kind of then can feed into agile software development, and the make part of that loop might start off being paper prototypes.
Yeah.
And actually paper prototypes can be brilliant if you're trying to illustrate something, and there's a great Google video about how to do them, which I will include a link. But after a few iterations, you're going to be building real stuff, and that's how the design thinking loop kind of fits into the agile loop. There's something more to explore there, I think, but it's really, really interesting. IBM's interested in how you build the technology and how it fits into DevOps and agile and all that kind of stuff, so that and they've designed it so that it does.
Yeah. It reminded me of something called an inception deck, which I used years and years ago. This was such a long time ago to talk about a new product that a company that I was working at was building. And essentially, it was just a lot of exercises together about stakeholders and what the upsell for the product was and what the elevator pitch was, all those sorts of things. So that just popped into my head as well. So there's a book by a chap called Jonathan Rasmussen, which we can also link to.
Yeah.
So he's an agile delivery person, but it sounds like those sorts of techniques would be at least conversant with design thinking as well.
Yeah, I think so. I'd be keen to say that design thinking is just, you still need architectural thinking and technical thinking and business. It's not a magic bullet that solves everything.
Yeah.
But as a way of engaging people into a direction of travel and tapping into their creativity and having them and being able to be solving the right problems, I think it's a fantastic option.
Yeah, definitely.
So obviously we've referred to a few things in that, and there will be links to those things in the notes. So I think we're done. That's 2 things, isn't it?
2 things talked about.
So we'd like to know your thoughts. You can tweet at us to our Twitter account, which is whatalotofthing.
Please get in touch.
And you can email us
at whatalotofthings@gmail.com.
And another option that occurs to me is that you can make audio recordings of your responses, and we can potentially include them in the podcast.
Yes.
So one thing we could do is have a follow-up section where we can deal with audio responses, treat them with the reverence they will inevitably deserve.
Absolutely.
And I think if you go to our anchor.fm/whatalotofthings homepage, it might be something that's available there. I'm going to turn the switch on to enable it, but I don't know how it will manifest itself.
So essentially, we promised to do a thing, and then we don't know how that thing will work. Yeah. So we'll see how that goes.
We could just cut that whole bit.
Well, we do work in software development. We're in the business of making promises that we can't keep.
Yeah.
Just for another couple of days of quiet time, so the stakeholders will leave us alone.
Yeah. But it's going to be really great. So if you can find a way to leave us voice messages, then do that. And we might include them in the next episode.
So much hedging.
The other thing I guess it's worth observing is that almost at random, we are now publishing our podcast every other Tuesday. So we are like an alternate week Tuesday podcast.
So we have settled into a cadence
We
which
have.
may suit us.
Yes. Obviously, what I'm really saying here is that if it's every other Tuesday and there's no podcast from us, then, basically abuse us on Twitter.
Yeah. Or just check that we're all right.
Yeah.
Doesn't have to be abuse.
No.
No.
But it helps.
The only thing we pay attention to.
That was all a joke. Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Ian.
Thank you, Ash.
And thank you, everybody.
And we'll see you all in, give or take, 2 weeks.
Yeah. See you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.